All right. Hello, everyone. I know people are just trickling in. I think we just started the session. So as we get going, I'll do a couple brief introductions here to kick this off. I'm really excited to focus on consumer data and POI data with SafeGraph today. And then we also have some papers that we're going to highlight, or a paper specifically that's going to highlight how this data can be used in the academic setting. But before we jump in and as people kind of get aligned here, I want to run a quick poll just to see if this polling feature works because we have one or two others that will come out through the day. And so I think Kelly can go ahead and launch this. But I want to see who we think is winning today in the World Cup. And if you don't know or don't care, you can skip it. Let me see who I think. Oh, it doesn't let me vote. All right, Kelly, can you see if any votes came through? Boom. All right, looks like France is going to win. Love it. We'll see. Okay, next question. Which field of research are you most closely aligned with? And so I'm curious to get a kind of quick poll of who's on the call. Will go through my background quickly, but I know the SafeGraph data particularly can be used cross-functionally across a lot of departments. So I'd be curious to just kind of see where folks on the call are from. Okay, let's see. Any winners here? There we go. Oh, good spread. Business and economics, finance, GIS, marketing. Cool. Awesome. Well, as we dive in, quickly, I'm going to introduce myself first. I'm Evan Barry. I'm the founder and CEO of Dewey. I'm really excited about this session because it's kind of the combination of what I've been doing over the last almost 6 years now. So actually, before I started Dewey, I was the VP of marketing at SafeGraph. So I'm actually very familiar with SafeGraph itself. I was there with Nathan when we were initially kind of launching some of the academic efforts. This was kind of back during COVID when we really realized this opportunity to work with academic researchers because we realized the data at the time could have so much benefit to the academic research audience. I will be clear, I know a lot of people still today see papers that cite SafeGraph that are a bit older that actually mention mobility data. SafeGraph no longer produces the mobility data. This seminar is going to be focused on their POI and spending data. And so we do have some other sessions and other vendors that now kind of have taken over that mobility data and are producing it today. So we actually have three different providers on Dewey that are in that space. They all have different kind of granularity and ways that they aggregate that data. Kelly will send a link to some of the sessions that we've done with those providers. But SafeGraph today is focused on really, really high quality POI and spending data. And so we're going to focus on that. I definitely encourage you to use the Q&A and chat feature throughout this session. These are way more interesting if they're interactive. And so as I see relevant conversations or chats come through, I'll actually chime in during the presentation so we're not bucketing them all at the end. And then I know that most folks on here are maybe already Dewey users, but if you do want to follow along and sample this data as we're talking through it, feel free to create a Dewey account at app.deweydata.io. And like I said, we're going to focus on the spend and POI data. We have Nathan from the team who will introduce himself, but we're going to go through a lot of the methodology of how this data is created and some of the research applications. And then we do have a researcher here as well, Hitanshu Pandit, and he's going to walk through some of his research that he's done using this data and kind of walk through the details of it as well. And then, of course, save time for questions. And then one last quick poll before we dive in. Have you used the SafeGraph data for your research? All right, let's see. Perfect. Oh, wow. Oh, nice. Okay, so half the people have used it or have research in progress, which is great. And then a few are just curious. And so this is a good spread of folks from a bunch of different departments with a bunch of different kind of familiarity with the data set. So with that, I'm going to introduce Nathan Kobinsky. He's at SafeGraph, and he's kind of deep into the weeds of knowing much more about how this data has evolved over the years, and is going to spend some time today talking about the data and help us kind of understand what's in the SafeGraph data. So Nathan, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey everyone, Nathan Kobinsky. Great to connect with all of you and excited to hear about your research. If you want to connect with me after the webinar, I will hit the share my screen button to go through the slides that I have. All right, just confirm everyone's seen my slides.
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. For today's call, I plan to do an overview of SafeGraph, our organization, our data. Then I want to walk through some common use cases to see how that might relate to the research projects you are currently working on or what you might have in mind. I'll share out a few self-service resources. We have a lot of information on our doc site. I really want to make sure you can take advantage of that if you are or are planning to use SafeGraph data. And then you can raise hands for questions throughout. I'll try to address those, but I'll just leave some time for questions before we jump to the next part of the session. With that, I can jump in. Um, I'll introduce myself, Nathan Kobinsky. I've been at SafeGraph 4.5 years, but my background on the wall and in my work and education is in geography. I was studying geography and GIS in college. I then spent 6 years at Garmin, a GPS company, 6 more years at Esri, a map software company, and now I'm at SafeGraph, which is a spatial data company that works with a lot of the folks that I've worked with in the past to provide data for their maps and apps. I'm on the account management side. I support our largest commercial, government, and partner organizations, including folks that do some of the work that we no longer do. Evan mentioned the mobility side. A lot of those mobility providers use our places and our shapes as the foundation, the geofences to the models that they build that capture mobility. I'll speak a little bit more on that in the use cases section, but I'm here to provide support to those large enterprises at SafeGraph, and that's who I am. SafeGraph. SafeGraph provides the highest veracity, most up-to-date places and data for builders and researchers. What we're really trying to do is create a truth set that you can rely on that to understand true records of places out in the physical world. Lots of data about different types of things. We focus on data about places. We really try to maintain the best places data by exclusively focusing on the data. We are a pure play data company. Our product is a CSV or a Parquet file with each row being a place and each column being an attribute about that place. There's no software or UI or services that we offer. It's just this table of data. And that can be useful to have us have that focus because it lets us cover all sorts of types of different data. So if you think of places that you might search for in a map, these could be independent retail stores, different industrial locations, maybe transit stops or apartments. That's in addition to these large brands, these multinational brands, where we have coverage of those both in the US and around the globe. In addition to finding the places and having a wide variety and deep coverage of different types of places, we try to find as much detail about those places as we can. These include things like the latitude and longitude of a place, an accurate place name. We spend a lot of time cleaning and enriching these names and looking at things like the openings or closures of a place or adding different tags that help you better categorize a place, not just a full service restaurant or a limited service restaurant, but describing more details, what type of cuisine or atmosphere is at the place. We also add in our own enriched context. One of the things we do is have building footprints that we create for all these POIs. Some of them are derived from AI and satellite imagery. Some of them we're hand drawing these. And this gives us really deep details on places like place in place relationships or place to parking lot relationships that you can use for all sorts of analysis. Our process for getting this data is bringing in all sorts of typically web-enabled sources. So we look out for different things like government sources, store locators, different aggregation systems. We try to bring as many different signals from across the web together to really ensure we've got an accurate listing of a place with lots of signal confirming it's a real, true, and open POI. We then spend time drawing those. We merge all these records to clean up any duplicates. We classify, we add the spatial hierarchy. We then verify this using other truth sets that we've aggregated. And then we repeat this on a monthly basis so that every month you can have a fresh file of whatever the latest places across the world are currently open and what their current attributes are. We also have a spend product where we take those places and we aggregate to them different credit and debit card spending at that place level. We have a lot of customers that have success using this to understand markets and trends over industries, over regions, over time, with lots of additional details about, you'll see a little bit more in a later presentation on things like income variables or some cross-shopping behaviors. What I wanted to do now is talk through some common use cases just to see if any of that overlaps with what you might be doing research on, or if it sparks any ideas about research you could do. These across a wide variety of industries. It's honestly surprised me when I joined SafeGraph how many different varied uses there were for a table, a flat table of places data. We have folks that build us into mapping and search experiences in the consumer world. We have a lot of customers doing site selection using our data. In the government space, I see a lot of disaster planning, disaster impact, response, recovery. We have customers looking at resource accessibility, risk assessment. They're, like I mentioned before, geofencing mobility data or looking at economic indicators. For each one of those, I've got a slide here. I won't read through all this text, but I will share these slides out with Evan to distribute to webinar folks as a resource that you can dig through, but I'll kind of talk through these at a high level. We have one customer or a few that use us in kind of a mapping and search experience. They want customers to be able to type into a search bar what they're looking for and have a list of high quality, truly open places with details about like their hours of operation so that they can find a restaurant near them. Another good example is this site selection piece. We have a few different customers in the retail and the real estate side of things that are trying to understand where to open their next business or where to offer new services. They want to understand where are competitive places. Let's say they're a fast food restaurant. They might want to look at where all the competitive organizations are. They might also want to look at complementary places. They might load in all sorts of POI related to grocery or gas to understand if that's a better site for them to build. In the disaster response area, a common one I see is overlaying storm impact, either forecasts or storm impact aftermath, like a flood map, over points of interest data to understand what might be upstream or downstream and try to quantify the amount of impact a storm might have had for a local economy or market or region. From a research standpoint, this was a cool one that was shared out by Minnesota state government leadership that they create this executive dashboard for their executive leadership at the state level at Minnesota. And one of those dashboards, they looked at similar to a food desert, but really a food access map to say how many grocery stores are within walking distance or driving distance from different census population block groups. So this is a really cool resource that helped them at the state level make plans on where they should invest more resources to improve access to healthy food options for families and children. We have some folks in the insurance space that also use us to understand and overlay risk. They might be looking at providing some kind of offer of insurance to an individual place, and they want to know what are the places nearby. If you have a hair salon that's right next to a fireworks store, that might be a different risk profile than one that's just next to Sweet Green, as an example. We also have folks that use our data to as a geofence. Like I mentioned, we have the place and rich place details, but we also have these shapes of places. So if they have mobile data from a cell phone, or maybe telematics data from a connected vehicle, or some kind of fleet of vehicles, or from service providers to businesses, they can capture that GPS data, and then they can overlay that with these geofences, these shapes of places, or we have shapes of parking lots as well to understand, did my service provider, did my visitor, did my customer actually visit this store or location? You might have research projects where you're using that data from one of Dewey's partners where it's pre-aggregated. You might also have a research project where you have some kind of app or capability built into your tools or tech where you might want to run your own geofences, or you might want to get access to more signal data to run your own inferences to try to track uh, these details at a different granularity than the providers might have.
Nathan, I'm going to chime in here because this is one question that came up in the Q&A around the mobility data specifically. So it's just kind of a question of clarity of, that transition away from mobility as a product, and understanding kind of when it happened, why it happened, and any clarity you can put there. And then I'm happy to alliterate too, because I was also kind of there during a lot
Yeah.
of that transition and also kind of understand some of the partners who are currently working with that. So I'll let you take a first stab and obviously happy to fill in some blanks too.
Yeah, happy to share more. We started more on the raw side and realized our customers wanted that more contextualized with places. We realized there were not good sources of places data that were up to date, that were really fresh, that were really reliable, and that had these strong fences. So we built that in-house for that purpose. As we went, we realized that that was probably our strongest business case was just having a strong, reliable, fresh, up-to-date source of these places and the place shapes. And that it was really hard for us as a small company, a startup at the time, to do both things really well, the mobility side and the places side. We decided just to focus all of our resources having this really robust, strong, up-to-date, fresh POI source and enabling anyone else that had those other use cases to continue to use our data as a foundation, but to not have to uh, have our team's efforts and engineering time spent on the mobility aspects and just wholeheartedly focus on the places aspects, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and is exactly what I was gonna kind of reiterate. Is I think they just realized, like, at the time at least, the core competency of the SafeGraph business was the POI and the places. I think when we looked at the market and we're looking at our customers, that was the common through line of all of the customers and most of the largest customers and sticky customers, et cetera, just needed really high quality places, and there was no other alternative in the market. On the mobility side, it's a much harder, place to compete. A lot of different players, et cetera. And so I think it was just a matter of focusing. But then just to clarify how the question was asked, they do not have mobility data anymore. It's not like you still are ingesting data and not producing it. They turned off the feeds for even the ingestion part of the mobility. So yeah, SafeGraph no longer produces that data.
That's correct. Yeah. So I would encourage you to find one of the DOE partners that we work with that use our places and shapes as the background to their data and then they infer it. Or there's some providers out there in the marketplace that provide more raw or ping level data that you can then combine kind of a DIY version of this to your product. That's similar to the next use case I'll describe on the spend side, but we have folks that do both. Folks that do it in-house that combine our data with mobility data and folks that just want to use the pre-computed mobility data. So either are
Yeah,
options.
perfect.
And that relates to the spend use case. So we have a lot of customers that want to understand, similar to mobility, they want to understand spending behaviors and patterns at locations. So I will say one of the common uses is folks taking SafeGraph data and a lot of the rich attributes we have to clean up messy transaction data. Maybe as a part of their DOE work or their other work, they have access to some kind of credit and debit card spending panel. In some cases, we work with large financial institutions, either banks or with FinServe customers, and they have access to some kind of transaction panel. Those transaction strings are incredibly messy. It might come through as some kind of abbreviation with different numbers and codes. And what they want to resolve that to is a pin on a map with a logo that's really clear and understandable. So what they'll often use is SafeGraph data to DIY. They'll bring their transaction panel to bear. They'll line it up with things like our places, our place locations, high accuracy latitude, longitudes, and then additional rich columns like the ID of a store that can show up sometimes in a transaction string, or a merchant category code, a unique code to these types of transaction, or NAICS, or name aliases, or a few of our other columns to help resolve this messy string into a kind of cleaned attribution of spending at a place. So that is one of the use cases that we have lots of transaction enrichment folks that use our places, again, as the foundation to enrich their own transaction data. In addition, what you hear a little bit more from the researcher in a bit is we've done that with a panel that we've sourced of transactions of credits and debit cards, and we've created our own spend product, and that's used both in the research world and a few of these kind of quasi-research organizations like the Chicago Federal Reserve has a bi-weekly updating retail summary dashboard, which the SafeGraph Spend is one part of that updating dashboard about retail forecasts. There are several resources to help you get started. I know the DOE team has a lot of resources available to you, but a lot of these links are out to the SafeGraph documentation pages. We have really detailed data schemas and docs where you can understand like the high level of each attribute we have. And if you click in, there's often really deep details about how that attribute was made, any caveats to that. We have a coverage map, so if you want to know what our coverage of POI is by country, even by category of place within the US. We list out our counts of that in our coverage map and our summary statistics. We not just share the counts of places we have in each release, but also the fill rates of every column in our core database for every country that we provide it for. We have technical papers available both for understanding the SafeGraph Places data and some guides on doing your own in-house attribution, doing that kind of visit attribution workflow. We have a whole section we call the product builder resources. So if you're new to getting started with SafeGraph data and want a cheat sheet of different common questions and common workflows, along with sample SQL and sample Python statements to help you just start running this on your own database as you get started, that's on our public website as well. And then since we have a monthly product, we have release notes where we share the latest on what new POI got added, what things have changed, what new feature enhancements we've made, and if there's any notable bugs that we've seen or addressed in the last month. Any questions?
Perfect. Well, I love those resources. I will say we love having you guys as a partner because of how, transparent you are with your resources and, known issues and release notes and things like that. It makes our life really easy to pass on that information and kind of aggregate it for our use case. And I can say confidently that a lot of other data vendors don't have that same transparency in their documentation. So we've always really appreciated that. One question did come through around the spend, some of the spend attributes. And so do you have any attribute around household income range information? And if so, how is that inferred? And I actually think that might also be covered in Hitanshu's paper as well, but it'd be great to hear your thoughts on that as well, Nathan.
Yeah, let me pull up our docs real quick here on spend and just show you what we're talking about. So if I go, I'll pull this into the screen. To our spend site, or sorry, this is our doc site. You can see where you can jump in and learn all kinds of information about our places and all of our attributes that we provide about places. And then again, if you want to learn more, you can click in and get more details on each one of the attributes. If I come down here to the spend section of our docs, you'll see similarly, we have all the different attributes out here, and it'll take me a while to find it because there's a lot of attributes, but I'll just type in income, and you can jump down to this bucketed customer income section where you can see these buckets, also the mean spend by income, and a few more details about there. So yeah, information on income as a part of our spend product.
Perfect. And then can you spend a second just like kind of taking a step back, and I think it would be helpful to understand like why is this such a hard problem? Like it almost feels easy, right? When everyone has access to Google Maps and we've seen these open source data sets be released with even though they've been pretty bad in terms of some of the POI data. Like why is it so hard to have a good POI data set? I think it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, good question. I would say in general, it is a more challenging experience than I originally thought. There is just thousands upon thousands of sources, and they don't always have the same agreement of what is a true, real open place. We've had instances where folks are saying, hey, this place is open on Google. Why is it closed in your data? And we're saying, yeah, it's open on Google, but look at the most recent Google reviews or look at their social media, their Facebook page, their Facebook business page where they said they went out of business 2 months ago, or I tried to order pizza and no one was at the door. A lot of these things will lag. A lot of these public data sets or open data sets are often community generated, and that is a useful input. Having community generated feedback about a place existing or not is one useful signal. A store locator is another signal. Places are motivated, highly motivated to keep their places up to date, but that's not the case for every place. Some places are not highly motivated. They might have like a business where they're mostly services oriented and they don't necessarily want to keep that up. So I think what SafeGraph really brings to bear on this is the ability to go find, source, and aggregate thousands upon thousands of sources across a wide variety of types and to resolve those down to a single place and the best and richest attributes about those places. And again, some of those come directly from those sources, like the right hours of operation. We have one customer that just is tracking the hours of operation change over time at their competitors. They really want to know, hey, did they start offering services later and later in the evening? Because when you talk about maybe access to food near a college campus, a pizza shop that's open till 7 for dinner versus a pizza shop that's open till 2 a.m. for after bar activities, those are very different levels of access to food depending on what kind of customers you're trying to serve. So it's not just having a real, true, accurate representation that a place is real and open, but having really strong attributes. Another thing I'll note about some of the common ones is they're optimizing for different things. We're often optimizing for having this real, true record of a place existing. A place like Google, they're often seen as a gold standard, but they're optimizing for returning a result when you search for something. they'd rather have something show up in your search results, even if it's not really that strong of a signal that it's a true, real open place, because they want to have search results show up. It's fine for them because it might show up really low in their rankings of a place being real or existing. You might not ever see it when you type it. It might be on the second or third page worth of results. But when you're trying to quantify something for research purposes, like how many fast food places are there, and they have several just junk records hiding at the bottom of their search results, those could be added into like, oh, it looks like there's five McDonald's. No, there's just five weak sources or signals for McDonald's open, not just one McDonald's that's really open in that place. What might be useful for folks that are trying to compare or understand how accurate SafeGraph data is, we do take accuracy very seriously. We have a whole section on how we resolve our recall, like how many places and what our coverage is of our data set, how that compares, what our precision, what the quality of those places are. And then we have quarterly benchmarks where we know that Google can have its caveats, but we do quarterly benchmarks and share those stats about different sample sets of data from SafeGraph to data from Google to see how does our coverage compare, what does our real and open rate look like compared to ground truths of those places, and we share those publicly out on our summary
Mhm.
stats page.
One other question came through in the chat was around the distinguishing online versus in-person transactions, and kind of a little bit of clarity on how maybe online transactions are shown, if at all, in the data set, and then specifically, how does that affect something like a delivery platform or a food delivery platform?
Yeah, I'll pull up this section here. I think this is like a little bit more nuanced. I feel like I've had questions like this before. I would encourage you to look at the docs. If you want to send me a little bit more details on the question as a follow-up, my contact info here, I can try to look into that in combination with Evan's team. But
Yep.
I would say we look primarily at spending that is associated with places. Our focus is places. So we don't look at like necessarily all spending. We try to associate that with like a place where we can. I think that's been like a piece that's come up before. So if we can see some kind of like location-based assignment, that's where our strength is. But yeah, if you want to send more details on the question, we'll take a further look at it.
Yeah, perfect. And I'll reiterate, if you just post in the Dewey discussions portal in their app, we can always kind of answer questions we know answers to and then bubble them up to Nathan if we need some help getting clarity. Cool. And then back to the kind of income, is the bucketed income based on reported income or basically just demographics of where the customer is from?
This is a question that came up while we were preparing for this. There's only a little bit of detail on our website about the income side of things, but my understanding at a high level is that since we're looking at a panel of debit and credit transactions, there's an ability to see things like income coming into like a debit account that helps us determine like what those income thresholds are. I can, yeah, follow up with some of the details that were shared with me earlier to this, but I think there's a little bit of details in the doc, but it's basically like a view in and then a prediction on top of like the data in the debit and credit transactions that we see.
Cool. And then the question around the spend per day too. Anything that's kind of unique around like weekends versus, a Monday, for that transaction accuracy, or is there any situations where the data might be like bunching together? Um,
Yeah, I've definitely
yeah.
noticed this looking at transactions that a lot of banks are closed on Sundays. There's like certain times when banks will process things. So I imagine that there's some level of that bunching that occurs just from the transaction standpoint. When you swipe your credit card is not exactly when you see it show up in your bank account, your credit or debit account. So I definitely see a little bit of that. I would say our panel size is such that I have had customers struggle with like looking at one individual place, maybe a Starbucks in a street corner, and trying to look at day by day, month by month, like what is the change at that one individual place? While we aggregate at the place level, I would say most of my customers have success rolling up to some higher level than an individual place just based on the limited panel size that we have available to us. So either they'll bring in their own panel to supplement what we have and do some of that transaction matching I described earlier, or they're looking at something at a industry level, a market level, maybe a regional level, or some other brand level that helps them um, fill in some of the gaps in that panel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. Cool. For the sake of time, I'm going to keep this moving and switch it over to Hitanshu to show some of his research. And please keep the questions coming. We'll definitely be sure to try to get to them, either live or as a follow-up. But Nathan, thanks for diving into that and excited to see some research from Hitanshu.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
All right. I think you might need to unmute.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think it's great insight. It opens a lot of doors of policy discussion which were not being discussed earlier. I'll show you some of them. So basically, I'm trying to use this spending data set to understand a recent policy change. Okay. And there are a lot of studies apart from mine, which is using SafeGraph. I would say that mine is just one of them. So I'm a PhD in economics from University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and that's when I got introduced to SafeGraph. And after that, I have been working at Northeastern. I'm still a research fellow over there, and now I have joined Bates College as a visiting research professor. So yeah, I'll discuss like it's a typical econ presentation for 15 minutes, Chris. If you have any questions, just uh, stop me in it. I'll try to explain as much as I can. And yeah, so just a crisp discussion on the policy. What I'm trying to explore with this data set is basically in 2024 April, this policy was implemented in California. Uh, it's not unique, an increase in minimum wage, but it's unique in the sense it was implemented, which is it's very specific to limited food services. And if you look at any administrative data set, it's really hard to point it out, which is a McDonald's, which is Taco Bell, and so it's not we cannot do it in terms of administrative data set. So that's where this SafeGraph POI comes in. That yeah, you can use that. You know the brand name, you know the address, you know the URL attached to it. You can verify it that it's really a McDonald's or it's some snack bar. What is it? So that's where this is helpful. Why I'm interested in this policy is because at that time in 2024, January, state minimum wage for California was $16. And the state decided that for fast food workers, especially for limited service workers, it will be $20. So it's a huge change in terms of that policy. And not just that, that restaurant or limited service restaurant has to have more than 60 establishments across the US. So this is basically you cannot get it in any of the administrative data sets until unless you have a collaboration with the state. Even that state, like yeah, across the US, you don't know. SafeGraph will provide you that information, how many establishments are there across the US for McDonald's and different places attached to it. So that's where it comes in. And another part of it is that an establishment has like it should not be inside a mall or an airport. So that has to be a separate entity. Another advantage of I think SafeGraph that yeah, it gives a parent place key where like you can identify a McDonald's or Taco Bell inside a mall or an airport, or it's outside, it's a separate entity. So this is like these are some advantages which drew my attention, and I was like, yeah, it's super cool to use this data set to study this policy. Just economic literature background. This question is very traditional, which of learning more about minimum wage effects. It has been studied in state increase in minimum wages, city minimum wages. Cardin Kruger won a Nobel Prize on studying this minimum wage topic, right? It's mostly studied in employment. Uh, how far literature has gone is looked at the scanner data set, like retail-based scanner barcodes. You get price information from that, so you can figure out that there's a pass-through of this increase in input cost to the customer. That's how far the research has gone. But now, because we have the consumer information on it, that how much consumer are spending, how much transaction is being conducted at that, so we can explore that as well. And that's what I am trying to do with this data set. That, yeah, the number of transactions taking place at that POI, how much total spending or mean spending by income is taking place, these kind of things, which I try to understand of increase in minimum wages, there's increase in input cost, and there's a pass through which is already established, and then looking at the consumer side of it. Any question until now on the policy or on anything?
I don't see any questions coming through yet. I would just keep going, and I'll definitely chime in if I see any that
Okay.
come through.
Yeah. So just a little bit more detail on how I'm using this data set is, of course, this is anonymized debit and credit card transactions at a place key or POI, place of interest, at monthly frequency, and I know how many distinct customer visited, how many transactions took place in that establishment, and how much they spend in terms of dollars. That's another, which is like an interesting part, is the income brackets, which came in the discussion as well previously. That yeah, how the income is defined. It's based on basically previous 12 months of history on their debit card and credit card information and how much they're spending, and they put them in a income bracket. So they have around seven income brackets. It could be like it's a income bracket of 25, 25 to 45, and so on and so forth. So I use that information to identify actually who is getting affected, like who is paying more or less, what is the change in terms of their spending at a McDonald's or a Taco Bell. And since this policy was focused on large chains, which is like more than 60 establishments across the US, it should have. So I'm focusing on the top national chains which are across the US, which are McDonald's, Taco Bell, Subway, and Burger King. These are very prominent, and I have verified it in terms of the URL based on the GOI data set, basically, which is provided. So it's not a snack bar which is named as Chipotle. It's basically a Chipotle at San Francisco, and the exact location, I know that. So as I've always been curious to compare, and whenever you submit a paper, you're always curious. The reviewer will ask you, it's a non-traditional data set. How can you compare it? So I compare it with basically county business pattern. The latest version is available for 2023. So it's been like 26 now, so it's 3 years. I'm expecting a newer version come up. So I compared that. Okay, let's make a ratio of uh, these establishments or business establishments which are attached to this NAICS code of 72, which is fast food and accommodation, and what's the representation across the US if I'm looking at it. And it's mostly, you'll see it's around one or actually greater than that, because actually county business patterns are identified from your payroll account. So a business can have multiple establishments in an administrative data set, but it will identify just one business. But because this is basically coming from geo locations, so you have each and every McDonald's, you know that around your area. It might be owned by just one business. So it will have more representation. You'll see that in the, if you map that around in the area. So what I do is I pick up all these brands, like top national brands, and look at it. Is it really what I'm trying to figure out? That this is California, which is basically my treatment state, and then across the US, what's representation? And I plot it, and I see that yeah, there's across the board they are well represented in terms of like Chipotle, Burger King, Subway, Yoshi Mike, whatever. These are actually um, places which are uh, covered by this policy in California, but not other places apart from the California. So another thing to mention is I only use uh, establishments which are present in my data from January 2023 until December 2024. So these are continuing establishments. So there's a balanced panel set, balanced panel, so that I'm comparing like whoever was in business from January, and they were in business in December 2024 as well. So that's a filter which I give to my data set. There might be exit and opening, new day. I don't include that safely in my data set. So yeah, just to uh, just to help the audience understand California, all the places, all these establishment of fast food, whichever is in California are my treatment, and the yellow ones, which these are the states which don't have any minimum wage of their own. They accept the federal minimum wage, which is 7.25. It hasn't changed from 2019 or 2009, sorry. So these are my basically the donors or the control group establishments, and these are my treated ones. There are other methods I do in the paper. You can go and read that. I'll keep updating the version. But yeah, this is for this presentation, I keep it this. So I make a synthetic difference in differences, which is now a very popular or actually it's now more used cases in identifying what's the control group, what's the treatment group. Since California is very different from other states, you need to have a synthetic. You cannot use a Texas versus California. You need to provide some weights and then make a graph of it. So what I look at it is the spending of it, and then if you see after the policy was got into effected, there's a decrease in spending for California. This is basically the total spending, which means that at each establishment, if you think about uh, the revenue part of it, that how much they were actually getting in terms of total debit and credit card in terms of dollar, that has decreased compared to what is the synthetic part of it. So there's a decrease in around 5%. In terms of the transaction, that has also decreased post this uh, uh, policy change because there's already a paper which says that, yeah, there's 7 to 8% increase in cost of each item, especially for these fast food joints in terms of taking all the data from menu prices and all. So that, yeah, transaction also decreases compared to the synthetic California part. And then if you look at the customer counts, even that decreases. Everything is decreasing. So what's new in this? New is basically the variable, which is income, which provides us more insights into it. That, yeah, I have actually income for most of the customers visiting these places. And I know if there's an income group, condition on their visits, they are spending more than the previously what they were spending. So that has increased. Yes, the total spending will decrease because there are less customer going in to these businesses. But whoever is visiting, they are spending more compared to the previous one. So that's an insight compared, like you cannot find in administrative data set, and most of them are significant, and they're showing like I provide two version of it, which is like OLS, two-way fixed effect, and the synthetic D&D, which provides like similar results of it. And we see that, yeah, there is like middle and middle class income customers which are spending more than the lower income group uh, with customers who are visiting these places. Um, just a graphical presentation on it. Yeah, look at it. Like if you look at the lower income group, yeah, that has increased, and it goes down after some period of time, but a shorter period, yeah, that has increased a lot compared to the synthetic part of it. Similarly, for the middle income group, which is basically my 45 and above and until 100K, that's what I do. And yeah, that has also increased compared to the other control group. It's around yet, I would say 10% or something. So yeah, overall, just a takeaway that the transaction, like in terms of transaction, you see a decrease in 67% decrease, and in terms of total spending, it decreases. It's 6%, but there's an increase in the spending when you condition on their visits. Basically, looking at each customers and their groups, income groups. So that has increased. So these are kind of insights which I got from the SafeGraph spending dataset. And yeah, if you have any questions, I can discuss further in detail each and every graph and estimates how I do it. And yeah, I think thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted for a sec. Thank you for
Mhm.
presenting. We are kind of at time. I did see a couple comments come through, which I'll just share quickly, and I don't know if there's a response needed, but one was you might consider the was it quarterly census of employment and wages for validation? I don't know if you took a look at that. And then the question that came through is, did you test for substitution to other sites not subject to this policy?
Uh, yeah, so since it's a safe graph presentation, I kept it like that. But yeah, there is this quarterly employment wage data set which talks about the employment part of it. So that uses advanced data. That's a separate paper. So like you can see it on my website. Say I compare it with that and looking at that's what I make a proxy of employment and all these things. So I can talk about in different session if you want to. Yeah.
Perfect. Good. Well, I'm gonna just share my screen back again just to quickly wrap this up. But thanks again for the
Mm-hmm.
presentation. It's really
Yep.
cool to see. And
Thank
I
you.
know you kind of
Mm-hmm.
ran through what is a lot of information. And so,
Mm-hmm.
as you suggested, I'm sure folks can follow up if they have more questions or want to dive into it more. But I think that was a really cool use case of some of the SafeGraph data and especially some of the demographic attributes tied to that. And we've seen a lot of other research from SafeGraph as well recently. Here's just four that we found in the last couple weeks or months. But we know we've seen a lot of papers in the past few years because when we did start Dewey, SafeGraph was one of our very first partners, and so we definitely appreciate them continuing to be on the platform. And just to wrap this up, I know a bunch of questions came through. I think we got to most of them, but if there's any others, there's two sources here to post at. If you are in the Dewey app, you can ask any questions on our discussions portal. This has recently been moved into the app. It allows us to answer questions much faster, surface other relevant questions and things like that. It also ties questions to data sets, so you can actually look for questions that have been asked by specific data sets. And I just put my personal email here. I'm always interested in talking with people, answering questions if I can, but specifically where I would love to connect is on any feedback that you have about Dewey or the platform or our data sets. We're always looking for new data vendors to add to the platform or some people to maybe even beta test new things or features. We have some really cool products we're working on right now. I'd love to get feedback on if anyone's willing to hop on a quick 15-minute call over the next few weeks. But Nathan, Hitanshu, thank you so much. We're going to wrap it here because we already are at time, but I really appreciate the time you spent in making this a great presentation. And I'll be sure to follow along with any questions that come through related to your presentations. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.